It began with a fast-rising sense of excitement and wonder. The entire universe imploded through my consciousness. This was simply the most intense experience possible. A singularity, a whiteout. I almost cried for joy at this realization.
Right there, everything hit me. I closed my eyes, shook my head, looked at the wall again, and there were 6 bears dancing in a circle with sharp teeth just grinning at me. I jumped up and ran over to a fence and grabbed onto it and just stood there.
I wanted to remind myself of who I'd always been, hopeful, enthusiastic, in wonder, and to hint at what the next chapter of life had in store for me. Little did I know my psyche had its own ideas of what needed my attention.
After learning about the new wave of research on the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, my perspective shifted. The fact that everything from addictions to cancer patients dealing with fear of death were being treated after only one session was intriguing.
Psychedelics are drugs that cause an altered state of consciousness. And so this includes drugs like LSD and magic mushrooms and DMT and ayahuasca and mescaline, but it also includes in that category drugs like ibogaine, MDMA, and ketamine. They can be subdivided based on similarities in the acute subjective effects. So for example, MDMA is different from other psychedelics in that it induces this empathogenic quality or this prosocial quality. Ibogaine is thought of as an onirogenic psychedelic because it induces a sort of dreamlike state. Ketamine and PCP, these are psychedelics that induce a dissociative state. And then LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, these are hallucinogenic psychedelics.
There's a long history of the use of psychedelics or mind-altering experiences in different parts of the world.
Psychedelics, usually the molecules are quite old. MDMA was discovered in 1912. Psilocybin has been around in mushrooms for thousands of years, of course, and the usage of it is very old. LSD was discovered in the 1940s by Albert Hofmann. After that, they started experimenting a lot with it in psychiatry.
A lot of work was done in the 50s and 60s, and then the war on drugs started, and then not all the work, but most of the work stopped because the drugs, better say, the medications weren't available anymore, and research was more or less banned. There was a crisis in biological psychiatry. There were very few new drugs coming to the market for depression. But there was definitely a need for a new, active, hopeful signal to the biological psychiatry.
psychotropic drugs go through career cycles, and it always starts with the substance being hyped, then there is an anti-hype, and there is a more balanced, pragmatic perspective on its benefits and harms. What I think is really interesting about psychedelics is that they never got to the balanced point because they were prohibited. And then it restarted, going in the 1990s at about the same time as Prozac became popular.
For a while, it was something that was a bit too taboo to research. And more recently, it's been more acceptable to study psychedelics, and that kind of led to an opening to start studying psychedelics as well.
At this moment, more and more people are getting interested in using psychedelics.
So again, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Harlem, and welcome to ICPR 2024.
A lot of people are hearing about psychedelics in the news, in popular media that never used to talk about psychedelics, and might be interested in trying the new thing without really understanding what they're getting into.
An important part is how is your own approach, but also what is the goal?
Some people, they are searching for making meaning of suffering, disease. Some people, they are searching for spiritual meaning, to accede to an usually invisible world. And for some people, it's psychotherapy.
One thing that really concerns me about the psychedelic renaissance is that, you know, people get these sort of half bits of information. And so people are kind of seeing these substances as similar, right, as having a quick joint or something. They really are not. These are substances that have incredible power to, you know, allow us to be able to really speak and reach into our subconscious.
And they can be very profound experiences that can be very destabilizing.
I think there are very conservative views about psychedelics that they will rot your brain or that they will cause mental illness, schizophrenia, that people will get lost and won't come back. That's one class of misunderstanding. There's another class of misunderstanding amongst the users, I think, where people think, oh, I'm just going to go and have fun and stare at some pretty colors and some lights, and that's going to be a cool trip.
I used to have a very black and white, I guess, had followed the way that I had been educated, thinking that all drugs were bad. And that was the end of my story. And, you know, biomedical sciences can prove empirically that perhaps these substances are actually not as harmful as they've been made out to be and can be beneficial. And I think to some extent it's useful, right, to get that legitimacy, for instance, to deconstruct the very negative connotation that psychedelics have since the 1970s with the war on drugs and everything.
The drug laws make it very difficult for people to do these things safely, and people are again forced into the grey areas and the margins to experiment with their own health and their body.
Thanks. Last time I taken. If you take a cap of mescaline, psilocybin, or LSD,
I close my eyes and completely leave my body, and see myself standing there for an instant, and then I'm floating above the white lake. Something grabs me by my shoulders and I pull it off with my hands. The place is definitely the afterlife, or someplace in between.
I remember taking that first dose. It was like looking at the world for the first time. Even breathing was an experience.
Intellectually, I was on fire and wanted to talk constantly with ideas, connections, and interrelated thoughts and visions appearing in a flow.
The circumstances will be different if you take LSD at a festival setting, which is by definition very uncontrolled, somewhat chaotic setting with a lot of input, as opposed to doing psilocybin in the context of a clinical treatment. But having an understanding of what it is that determines optimal effects and reduces the potential risks, because they do exist, having a list of those important elements, I think that will be a crucial outcome.
There's a lot of experience we can draw upon. There literally have been thousands and thousands of sessions with patients, with skilled psychotherapists and psychiatrists. So at this point, the research mainly PTSD, depression, and addiction. But there are so many other problems people are facing. We think these substances would be beneficial.
We have learned quite a bit about the psychedelic experience, about difficult cases, about specific personality types, about the levels of preparation and surrender that an individual has to have before they go into a psychedelic experience to avoid extreme challenging experiences and favoring specific kind of experiences that lead to therapeutic outcomes.
In the last decades, the local mestizo shamans in the Amazon just have been adapting to the Western theory of disease, which is mainly influenced by psychology, psychiatry. So yeah, now they integrated the notion of trauma, the notion of stress or burnout.
For the last 50 or so years, neuropsychiatric treatments have been based on a model of disease that's sort of a biochemical imbalance model of disease. And so if you're depressed, it's because you have a biochemical imbalance in serotonin, and all we have to do to make you undepressed is to restore that balance. What the psychedelics are doing is challenging that entire model of disease, because people are essentially taking psychedelics, having an experience that enables to learn something about how their disease process manifests, change that learned habit that they've built around that injury, and then they are essentially reporting that the disease is cured. If we could demonstrate this principle of, psychedelics being an adjunct that helps learning rather than restoring a biochemical imbalance, then we can start thinking about other diseases as well, like stroke, traumatic brain injury, anything that essentially there's involvement of learning that initially encodes the behavior.
Psychedelics on the biological level, and a neurotransmitter level, they're quite different. What you see in the brain is a disturbance of the normal connections between the different parts of the brain.
The way that the psychedelics seem to be working is that it triggers a set of cellular changes, and that enables the cell to reorganize its synaptic weights and restores plasticity to an adult brain. Psychedelics seem to be what we call the master keys for unlocking something called critical period. So critical periods are these windows of time where the brain is especially sensitive to its environment and able to learn in lasting ways from that environment. So most people will be familiar with the notion of a critical period when they think about how hard it is to learn a second language as an adult compared to how they learned their first language as a child. And that's because there's a critical period for language learning, and as you get older, it closes. The reason that we're so bad at curing diseases of the brain is because by the time we get around to intervening, most critical periods are closed. And so if there was a mechanism or a master key for unlocking critical periods, we would be able to cure diseases of the brain much more easily.
I think one of the most intriguing findings in recent times when it comes to the neuroscience of the psychedelic experience, and this is studies employing LSD, psilocybin, or DMT, is that these compounds appear to act on systems in the brain that have evolved later. So these are parts of the brain that have to do with our cultural life. We don't know very well why that happens, but some neuroscience evidence suggests that psychedelics dismantle the stories that we make up, not just about ourselves, but also about the external world and also possibly reality. They act as a massive deconstructor of experience. The way that we move around in the world, the way that we experience everything, and the way that we exist is very much commanded by hierarchical models or stories. Stories about who we are, stories about the way we think about other people, and the stories that govern our relationship with the environment. And so it's like you have a grand narrative and you have the little narratives below them that are being somehow subsumed by this larger picture, this larger model of reality. And we implement these hierarchical stories in the brain. If you take out that filter, or if you reduce or dismantle its influence, what you will have is that stories that were kind of unheard of before start to come up.
When it comes to reshaping the inner world, you don't need psychedelic substances to have a rich inner world. However, with the psychedelic experiences, it's like a quick ticket. You take a peek into that inner space. They can help you see things from a different angle. And because you can see things from a different angle, you might eventually be able to change that belief.
The brain under psychedelics is a more entropic brain. Is a brain that is more closely aligned with chaos than order. You inject a bit of chaos, of entropy, and you will get these new pockets of self-organization. At the level of mental experience, there's a deconstruction, and then there's a new realization coming out of that. They deconstruct something to reconstruct something that provides some form of, in the case of therapy, provides some form of comfort at the beginning. Understanding the origin of trauma, like there's repressed memory that comes out of abuse, for example, and holding on to that very dearly can become very reassuring to individuals. But in the long term, that can become quite complex. Validating these memories is not a simple thing.
I like to think of psychedelics more as a catalyst or a magnifying glass for what's going on in your mind and what is going on in the way that you process things.
I think this generates a strong impact. It emphasizes the potential of psychedelics to transform many fundamental notions about reality, about ourselves, about the things that we hold dear. So therefore, I think that can become a very meaningful process, and that can apply not just at the abstract philosophical idea of the world, but also at my personal life, things that are related to my emotions and affect and so on, and the insights that might be gleaned.
Traditional psychotherapy is about going and reconstructing your narrative a little bit, changing some pathways, trying to reframe and recontextualize your life's experiences. Whereas the psychedelic experience is more about deconstructing a lot of it and then allowing someone to build it back up. In this psychedelic state, you don't have the normal defenses, you may have less fear, so you have more of an opportunity to go into that response, into that experience, into those memories, and explore what's there and process those things in a way that you weren't able to do when you had a habitual response to that trauma when it first occurred, or more of a just an immediate protective response.
Psychedelics could be strong tools for belief transmission, and without the necessary ethical care, you are like way more permeable to the discourse, the narratives that is proposed by the institution where you take the psychedelics. That can be highly problematic for obvious reasons.
Most of these experiences bring you to a childlike state.
Of course it's scary because you're losing control and you're losing your identity sometimes.
People become hyper-suggestible under the influence of psychedelics, and they can be more easily manipulated. They can put a lot of power in the hands of the therapist. So they can externalize a lot of the healing effects to the other person, who becomes aggrandized in their perception, becomes some godlike figure, some guru, and people who want to kind of abuse this status, they can easily do that. You know, if people give you something and say that you will likely see God or have a spiritual experience, it becomes much more likely to actually happen, because psychedelics can act as a kind of super placebo, super potentiator of expectancy effects.
We always have to keep in mind that these are very powerful medicines and that what we're doing to people is restoring them to that state of vulnerability and suggestibility that we try and protect children when they're in that state. It's potentially very destabilizing and very dangerous.
Sometimes a psychedelic session can give experiences that are totally unexpected. That can be challenging, especially with people who have gone through a lot of stress and trauma in their lives. And the situation can arise that some things have happened to people, but they don't really know it anymore or have kept it very far away. And with a psychedelic session, this can come up massively.
We have some examples of how psychedelics can also induce forms of obsessions around specific topics that are not necessarily healthy, viable, or even true. We have the possibility of psychedelics inducing false insights or false memories in the context of psychedelic therapy.
We don't really know how many times people have these difficult experiences, but I think people tend to talk about the good experience, but not much about difficult experiences.
As a lot of people know, you can have a bad experience and then it can still be therapeutic. And sometimes working through trauma or working through therapy can be unpleasant. The tricky part there, that there's kind of a fine line, is differentiating what is a healing process from what is a destabilized state where someone really needs additional support.
I don't know what time it was when it happened, but I became one with the void. I was no longer attached to my human body, though at the same time I knew that I was. I could not fight the intensity of the trip, and I quickly questioned why I thought it in the first place. So I finally gave in.
I blacked out for large sections of time and don't remember much until my boyfriend had to leave. The tone of voice he used threw me into a downward spiral of despair. I thought he had died.
The music was disturbing, like demons chanting. I felt possessed. People kept having conversations, kept leaving the room. The shaman eventually gave up on trying to control the situation. That's when I knew we were in trouble.
During this difficult ayahuasca ceremony, it came to me, the holy trinity of a good trip. Your bucket, your breath, and a sense of humor.
Psychedelics are very particular drugs, and what makes them very particular is precisely the degree of uncertainty around what kind of experiences it will induce.
With any of the substances, you can have trouble because it's all a bit unpredictable, the way how people feel and how their personal biology will interact with this substance.
The screening for retreats is incredibly important. We will not take anyone into retreats who is in what we would call an acute crisis point of their PTSD. That might be sort of high suicidality or anything, in such that your mind is too agitated at this moment in time for it to be realistically safe for you to take these substances. Because there's quite a good likelihood that you will become even more distressed. Also, we definitely need to be mindful of our mindset as females in terms of what our hormones can do, you know? When we have an increase in progesterone, for instance, it changes the way that GABA receptors work, and that changes then the way that we experience intrusive thoughts. So we see a spike in intrusive thought patterns during high progesterone periods.
If you have to take antidepressive medication, for me, it doesn't make sense to do it because you have to feel safe.
The context should always be safe and always be prepared for challenging moments.
So the set going into this experience is very important. It sets up how you're going to interpret what's happening inside your own mind.
Set means user's mindset, and setting means the social and cultural and physical environment in which they're taking the substance. Both set and setting shape people's psychedelic experiences.
I think the setting is very important, incredibly important. I think the mind is a very suggestible thing, especially when you are on those realms. And the setting will interact with all your senses. So how you're going to feel is directly related to that.
What makes me feel safe is beauty. If the setting is beautiful and the setting is comfortable, I can surrender.
Thinking of an individual as their own context. So they come and they have the multitude of factors and lived experience and thoughts and beliefs and cultural groundings that they have. And it's a question of working with that in the moment to try to make the experience what it can be.
There are always unknowns in the setting, and we can always try to measure a lot of variables, and it's good to try to measure them, but also good to be open to the fact that there are lots of unknowns and there's lots of mystery, and there's a lot of things that we cannot predict. And in a way, psychedelic practice is not an accurate thing. There's always a matter of exploration, of going into unknowns and be ready for surprises.
Your mood at the moment that you take it, psychedelics enhance all of these effects. You know, if you feel anxious or a little depressed or a little uncomfortable, you know, we do know that psychedelics are very likely to exacerbate that effect. And that can be as broad as the cultural context in which you take it. If you take, for example, psychedelics in a country or in a place in time where psychedelics are illegal and heavily criminalized, you know, there is likely something in the back of your mind giving you a sense of guilt or of caution or maybe a little bit of paranoia that you might be found out.
The first thing with the setting has to always be, are you safe? Are you in a place where, should something go wrong, there is the right people around you who are in the right mindset also to be able to help you? That's not just consciously feeling safe, that's subconsciously feeling safe.
People need to feel safe enough in order to allow and let go and go into their processes without needing to be vigilant.
You need to have a good mindset going in. It's one of the predictors of whether or not you're going to have a good trip or a bad trip. I think mindset, it's not about like, oh, you need to be happy or you need to be, jolly to go in. That's not really what this is about. When we're talking about mindset, it's about, do you have your mind set in a way that is appropriate for what you're about to do, that is appropriate to then apply a psychedelic state to it.
The most important thing to keep in mind is that psychedelics are not for everyone. It may be the case that psychedelics aren't for you. And it may also be the case that now is not the right time to do a psychedelic.
So one of the things that's really important when you're going to choose for yourself a psychedelic retreat is to first look at yourself and to first look at what you need from this experience. But you need to go in there mindful of what you might need to be able to find the answers.
Clear intentions are one of the factors that have emerged as being predictive of a better experience, along with openness and surrender.
It's very important to enter the experience in the right belief, I would say, and with not a lot of expectations.
People usually have some expectations, have some things they would like to work on, and that's important. But we say hold your intentions lightly. So the moment you go into the session and the medicine takes its effect, we ask people to just follow what comes up. When there are too much expectations involved, you can actually hold back the process.
That high expectations can lead to very big disappointments, and those can exacerbate people's problems.
One of the most interesting aspects of psychedelics is that it's breaking your expectation, breaking what you think that you already know, but also enriching yourself and helping you to build new, stimulating perspectives.
However, regardless of the mindset that you're in, if you have the right company, you might also benefit from that experience. Because there is a general way of looking at substances that if you are in a bad headspace, you might have a bad trip. It depends a lot on the company. It depends on the surrounding, the social setting that you're in. In many cases also, even if you are in a good set, but the setting is not correct, that might influence the experience big time.
And then there's also, the intersubjective relations. I mean, the relation you have with the persons that are there with you. If you know them at all, if you trust them at all, fully or a little bit, that to a very large degree will determine whether you will likely have a positive experience or a more difficult one.
No matter what substances you take, if you're in a moment of crisis, what you need is human connection or human understanding. And when I mean connection, doesn't mean be too close. Sometimes it just means just a presence, just to know that somebody's there and that you're not completely alone.
When you come with a friend,
And that's really beautiful. And that's really, really positive because normally they already have a connection. So because you can go much deeper when you are feeling safe. So you feel safe normally much quicker already because you have a connection, especially if it's friends.
The collective is something important. Comunitas in the ceremony leads to more sharing between individuals that were in the same group, so more openness between individuals in the group. And that eventually allows the emergence of a togetherness of everybody. So a celebration, a cathartic moment of which everybody are like in it together, joys. And very quickly the group bonds. And this is actually a big part of the healing. So even if they thought they're coming for their own personal inner healing, those relational aspects were very crucial for their mental health.
We can think of 2 or 3 dynamics. I think number 1 is interpersonal. Everything, so much is derived from that interaction. Feeling safe with the people present, trusting the people present, and how they feedback that sense to you. And a second aspect is adaptability, I think, flexibility. That the set or the setting should not be rigid, right? It should be adapted to the individual at the space and at the time that they're at when they show up.
Want people to obviously process things and having that sort of open mindset to move forward towards the problem can sometimes be very helpful when there's a facilitator there to guide you through that and to sort of encourage you to face the problems.
People that are supporting others moving through psychedelic experiences, whether that's in the capacity of a shaman, a therapist, a facilitator, a guide, a practitioner.
Obviously look for people who have some credibility. It's an absolute wild world out there. You need people who are going to sit there while you are crying and screaming and going through all of this and just say, yes, this is fine. You're fine. Everything is fine.
They need to be very much the rock, and the lighthouse is a very good way to describe it, because you will be in this sea and a lot of things are going to come up, so you really need somebody to be around you that you trust, who will be able to keep the space safe around you as a space holder or a trip sitter.
Some people, after an hour, you feel strongly connected to them and you can dive deep into the experience. Some people need 10 sessions before they trust you as a therapist and they say, okay, I'm ready. Trust is something that includes cultural variables, individual variables.
But how do we know that the person that is going to take care of us when we're in this incredibly vulnerable state really wants the best for us and has the competencies to actually hold us?
Do you trust them to be there? Do you trust them to hold the space for you? And also look at their intentions. Are their intentions that they want to hold space for me in order for me to achieve the goal that I've already defined of what I want to do here? Or does that person have their own agenda? I think being a facilitator needs a level of maturity.
You need to have a capacity to read the room, intuitively understand where participants are in their journey. And I think one of the first places where we could look at is, do they support you in becoming more autonomous? In other words, are they going to be very directive with you? And are they going to be telling you how things are? Are they going to be imposing their ideas on you? Or are they curious about you? I think, again, that's my opinion, that a good psychedelic practitioner will enable you to find the answers for yourself and will not try to impose their ideas on you, will not try to do the healing for you. They will empower you. They will give you choice.
All of a sudden, I was pulled up really high, then dropped into this big black space with no light whatsoever. Now I know why the voice told me to relax. I was freaking out. I thought he was supposed to relax so he could show me something good. I screamed for my nurse and asked her to hold my hand like a child. When I felt her hand touch mine, I flung it away. We laughed about this the next day.
My mind went to a visualization of a rainforest. I was lying on the ground after it had rained. Everything was a deep, beautiful green, and the earth was soft and warm. Rob put his hand under my back. I could feel myself totally melt into the table.
About 50 minutes after ingesting the MDMA, I said with a smile to my therapists, I feel like I'm dying, but it's okay.
We always talk about setting and dosage. Because it's also important to understand that, a difference from dosage, it could be the whole thing between a really bad trip or having a good night.
The doses are quite a sensitive subject. It requires a very delicate assessment. It involves the body weight, the state of being. Like if you are on an empty stomach, it's very different than if you have had something.
The shaman himself usually takes a psychedelic and is under the influence that helps them to do their practices.
Some people need more, some people need less. It depends on the sensibility of the people.
So the pharmacology has the effect of making you even way more sensitive to contextual factors. So then it's like underlying the importance of setting, the importance of not only the context, but also the narratives, the song, the music, the smells.
It's important that we understand how the suggestibility can be skillfully manipulated and used so that people have these safe and meaningful experiences. For example, the way that they use music very skillfully, or the way that they use the group in a skillful fashion, the way that they use the posture of individuals in a skillful fashion.
The posture is important. When you lay down, the blood goes to the brain, and maybe the effect can be a little bit strong. So in case that you're laying down and you start to feel super strong, just come again to your posture and breathe.
I think it's good to consider all of the different senses that people have. We have the sound, we have the visual element. We have candles, we have certain kinds of garments. Symbol connects to a whole complex of narrative. So if we're in a psychedelic session and a person walks in dressed like that, then when you see them, you then perceive the narrative that you have connected to that. If wearing traditional garments, for example, then we're telling a traditional story.
With smells, smell is different. I think that's really, really powerful because I think it can go really deep into another level of making an imprint in you.
Music can create a narrative.
I really like live music. For me, live music, it creates a different experience at all. We work with guitars and with flutes, with shamanic drums. We work also with modern instruments like handpands. But music, what is very important for me is that it creates a journey. It's not completely plain. It's nice when there are chapters that are heavy and dark, and other chapters that are soft. And because that range of different sounds and textures create variety in the journey.
String instruments or guitar, it has another access to your being, an emotional being. The drum, because it has a lot of vibration as well. It goes into your body. You play the drum and then you see people starting to shake.
We saw that LSD and music increases connectivity between para-hippocampus and the visual cortex. So the para-hippocampus is a area in the brain that relates more to memories, to past life, to different parts of ourself, and that is more communicating with visual cortex.
I think it's really important to use music that facilitates the process, but is not directing it. In psychedelic psychotherapy, we try to use music that has no lyrics, people can understand at least, because that will direct you in a certain way.
And have a sort of intuition about what type of music will have what kind of impact on people in the room. Taking all these factors into consideration of people might have different cultural backgrounds, different demographics, different ages in the room, and yet you need to use music and silence. You can also use silence in a really beautiful way.
The trip was a mind and life-changing experience, but I really don't know if I want it to be life-changing. I would urge everyone to respect the power of these drugs.
Our data basically suggests that if you are to try and get rid of the trip, you will essentially eliminate the therapeutic efficacy of these drugs.
And now we start to see that maybe the subjective experience during the trip that people make might be essential for obtaining the effect of the psychedelics and the psychedelic-assisted therapy. So maybe we start to learn from this psychedelic research that we should actually also ask what these medications in subjective experiences do to the patient.
We need better science. I think the challenge in the next years will be how do we validate, how do we understand the influence of experience and the influence of set and setting. We need somehow science that is able to combine these different variables that interact.
We have to find a consensus as to what those crucial variables are, how they should be reported, so that scientists in the field and researchers can start doing that, and we can start getting some empirical evidence as to the importance of these variables. Because right now, it's more anecdotal.
Trying to leave the experience out of the picture, which is some of the attempts that are happening now with the development of novel psychedelics, I find it really problematic and very narrow-minded when it comes to understanding how the mind works.
A lot of the important hands-on knowledge exists in the hands of practitioners and participants. People working in the medical field, they interact mainly with other people in the medical field and definitely don't have a lot of interaction with people who work in the underground. So it's important to bring those people together because that's the only way you can, exchange information and learn from each other.
I mean, the idea that you would resolve a global mental health crisis with psychedelics is still pretty megalomanic. The main idea was to bring psychedelics into institutions, as you have to find a space for these wild substances in a rule-governed world. And I think that's part of the drama that's playing out.
In order for the different uses of psychedelics to be integrated safely into our society, I think it's very important to establish exactly under what conditions people should be allowed to use it, who is best equipped to guide people through such experiences, according to what guidelines, what professions need to be informed.
We should imagine that it's possible to have certain treatments that are so much more helpful than the way we do it now. I think it should be accessible to each and everybody to at least think about.
We need to sometimes step down from our high horses as scientists and think that we're going to crack the code and figure it all out. We won't. There is so much that we can't understand and that we won't understand, especially when it pertains to the mind, because it's infinitely complex. But as best we can, we try. And I think this is the value of pragmaticism, is understanding, that there's limits, but that you can still try to see what's useful.